So voter suppression is really any activity, legal, extra-legal, otherwise, that's aimed at stopping people from exercising their right to vote. Really, as long as we've had voting in the US, we've had voter suppression.
The first turning point in the effort to stop voter suppression really came in 1870 with the adoption of the 15th Amendment after the Civil War. Unfortunately, even though that had been adopted in the nation's highest law, the Constitution, we continued to see voter suppression. So there were legal efforts, things like a grandfather clause, which said if your grandfather could vote before the Civil War, then you are allowed to vote. Clearly intended to disenfranchise Black people, many of whom had had enslaved ancestors. And then there were indirect things like poll taxes and literacy tests. John Lewis famously talks about people being asked, how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap, right? Something that has no answer. Some modern examples of voter suppression include things like cutting the number of polling places, cutting down the number of days where you can do early voting, enacting a strict photo ID law, also purging voter rolls, right, before you get to an election.
There was a necessity for a Federal Voting Rights Act to come behind what was already constitutionally protected because we weren't doing a great job. The Federal Voting Rights Act is designed to protect your access to the ballot box and to make sure that you're not being discriminated against based on your race or other categories. And it had really strong protections against voter suppression.
The Voting Rights Act of 1965 brought the 15th Amendment back into the law books. And in 1982, Congress made it clear that suppressing the vote, even if you didn't intend to, but the actual effect of the practice was to suppress the vote, that was not okay under the Federal Voting Rights Act. Unfortunately, in the last sort of 15 years, we have seen that rolled back.
In the Shelby County decision, the Supreme Court gutted a portion of the Voting Rights Act. And what you saw after that disastrous decision was the floodgates open, really. Lots of states put really restrictive and sometimes really racist voting restrictions on the books in order to stop people from getting access to the polls. And recently, there have been other federal court decisions that make it harder for individuals whose voting rights have been violated to fight back.
In 2021, we had the first case that the Supreme Court took on this question of what is the standard for voter suppression under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Section 2 being the section that applies to the entire country. And in that, they basically made it harder to prove. We know that federal courts have grown increasingly hostile to voting rights, and so being able to go into state court is really important now more than ever. State voting rights acts are able to get at practices that federal laws just don't get at. For example, something like in Virginia, where they prohibit voting practices that result in the denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen to vote on the basis of race or color. But you can also add in specific extra things, like moving a polling place within 20 days of an election. The language in state VRAs can not only go beyond the federal VRA as it currently is, but it can even go beyond the federal VRA as it was in 1965.
State voting rights acts provide more tools to help protect voters from voter suppression, including private right of action, allowing individuals and organizations to go to court to have folks' voting rights protected.
So if you start enacting laws that mean that some people can't register and some people can't vote, particularly if those people are historically disenfranchised minorities, that means you end up with only one group of people, or predominantly one group of people, deciding who gets to make decisions. So it is really important that we stop voter suppression so we can keep our democracy, of, by, and for the people. And if we are going to do that, we need laws. We need to be able to go into court and say when a particular practice or a particular law is disenfranchising historically marginalized communities. And state voting rights acts are a way that we can do that.
Thanks for watching LDF and CAP's State Voting Rights Acts video explainer series. This video looked into the concept of voter suppression, and our experts discussed how state voting rights acts can address these harmful policies.
To learn more about the essential components of state voting rights acts and how they can help us build an inclusive, multiracial democracy, check out our websites and follow along with this video explainer series.